Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Forestry podcast. I'm your host, Seth Stevenson, the communications coordinator with the Arkansas Forestry Association. And today we are joined with a new voice of forestry to discuss our topic this month, endangered species, kind of get a little bit of an update of some of the endangered species here in Arkansas. But before I introduce my guest this month, let me give a special shout out and thank you to our sponsors, Farm Credit. We're going to hear a little bit more from them later on in this episode. But for now, let's introduce our guest, Chris Davidson, a deputy field supervisor with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Seth. I'm glad to be here.
And I don't think you're based out in Conway. Is that right?
Correct, Conway.
Okay, awesome. So we didn't have to get you too far or drive too far this morning to get you here. But
Nope.
Chris, since you are a new guest, let's just start with your professional history. Can you just let the people know kind of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Born and raised in Arkansas, grew up just outside Little Rock and went to school at Arkansas Tech University where I got my bachelor's degree in fish and wildlife biology. And then while I was doing an internship with the U.S. Forest Service on the Ouachita National Forest, my senior year I got introduced to freshwater mussels, which ultimately led to my graduate research at Arkansas State University where I got my master's degree. From there, coming out of college, I went to work for the Arkansas Cooperative Extension Service for 1 year on a catfish yield verification program, working with catfish farmers in eastern Arkansas. And then after that, I worked for 5 years for the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality as a stream ecologist. And I've been with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service here in Arkansas now for 23 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you've just kind of done a little bit of a lot of things then. Well, Chris, since it's been a minute, even since I've been in a biology class, we're talking about endangered species and kind of specifically some of the endangered species here in Arkansas. What exactly, if you can remind people what it means for a species to be endangered, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so in the simplest terms, without getting into all the legal definitions, an endangered species is simply a species that is at risk of extinction now. And then a threatened species is a species that's likely to become endangered in the foreseeable future.
Okay. And how are those classifications made? I guess who's making those classifications?
Yeah, so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a lead for the classifications. There's the process is a very complicated legal process and also science-based process. So there's basically two ways that a species can get listed. So the Fish and Wildlife Service has what we call a discretionary review, where we can actually, based on information we have, review a species and make a discretionary decision about whether or not it warrants listing. But the more common process is what we call the petition process. And so those petitions are usually received from citizens, organizations, businesses. It can be anybody in the public that submits a petition. And so when we initially receive a petition, it's called we call it a 90-day petition. So legally we have 90 days to make a finding of whether or not we have substantive information to move forward to the next phase. If we do, in most cases, the bar is pretty low for a 90-day substantive finding. So then we would say that, that the 12-month finding is the next step. And so we move into what's called a full-blown status review of the species, where we collect all the available commercial scientific information that we can get our hands on from our partners, from organizations, from universities, researchers, everything that's available. So everything's based on the best available science, and we'll put together a status review, typically within 1 year of moving into that 12-month finding process, and then from there we'll make a decision on whether or not listing is warranted. So there's three potential outcomes. You can have a 12-month finding that is not warranted. So there's not sufficient information to justify a listing classification. You can also have a warranted but precluded determination, which is means that listing is warranted, but we have higher listing priorities at the time. And in that case, we put the species on what we call a candidate species list. And then finally, if we can make a warranted listing, so if a species warrants listing, then we would move into the rule-making process where we would publish a proposed rule. We would solicit public comments. If we get a request for a public meeting or a public hearing, then we would host those as well. And then, within typically about 1 year from proposing a rule, we will make our final determination on whether we move forward with finalizing that rule or if we withdraw the rule.
So that whole process takes roughly about from petition to final rule declaration about a 3-year process, give or take a couple months.
Yeah, I would say typically 2.5 to 3 years. It can drag out a little bit longer than that sometimes too. It just depends. But on average, probably 2.5 to 3 years.
And it's a whole team of people. I mean, it's not just Fish and Wildlife. Like you said, you guys work with researchers and stuff like that. And even the public to get that petition process started to kind of make all of this happen.
Correct.
So the second outcome that you mentioned, the one where there are higher priority kind of candidates, and they go on a list, and what I guess what happens with that list, if you don't mind my asking?
Yeah, so with candidate species, as long as they're on that list, we continue on an annual basis to review their status just to make sure that they still warrant listing. It gives our partners in the service an opportunity also, while those species are candidates, to do conservation work, fill data gaps, put conservation projects on the ground, and hopefully in that interim period while they're on the candidate species list, we can get enough conservation that benefits the species to where they no longer warrant listing, and then we could remove them from the candidate list.
So work is still being done to help those species. Just I guess, is it more work is being done with the ones that are higher priority, or is I don't know if more work is even the right terminology here.
Yeah. So I mean, we're doing work with candidates because we still want to try to preclude the need to list if possible. Other species that are, that have warranted, but they're not being precluded, that are not on the candidate list, then, we're still moving through that same, petition process that we discussed previously.
Okay. So what are some of the endangered species that we have here in Arkansas, Chris? What are some of the species we're talking about when we mention endangered species?
Yeah, so we have 36 endangered and threatened species in Arkansas. The majority of those are aquatic species, so freshwater mussels, fish, cave crayfish, and they have some, really cool names, like rabbit's foot, Arkansas fat mucket, snuff box.
Classic Arkansas names.
Those are some of the mussel names, just to name a few. And then, like I mentioned, we've got some cave obligate species that occur up in northwest Arkansas, that being those Ozark cavefish, and we have 2 cave crayfish, the Benton County cave crayfish and the Hell Creek cave crayfish. And then we've got several bat species, some birds, a few fish that I mentioned, and then one insect, the American burying beetle. And so, that's kind of a rundown of the 36 species we have. What's really cool about a lot of those species is that they're endemic either to Arkansas or to the Ozark and Ouachita Mountain region of Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri.
And is there a reason why the majority of them are aquatic species? Are aquatic species just more apt to being endangered or threatened?
So there's a lot of threats, not just, everything that occurs on the landscape affects our water quality in rivers and streams. So there's just, there's more species that are aquatic. There's also, just a lot of threats in general to those, and we can talk a little bit more about those if you want to. But.
Yeah. I mean, what are some of these threats that we're talking about? If it's just a numbers game, they're just more aquatic species. That's one thing. But if everything that we do on the landscape is affecting water quality and water or aquatic creatures, what are some of these threats that we're talking about?
Yeah, so the primary threat in Arkansas, and not just in Arkansas, but probably throughout most of the southeastern U.S. to aquatic species is sedimentation. And so when you think about sediment delivery to rivers and streams and where that comes from, it comes from, different types of land uses. So, you've got development, you've got unpaved roads, you've got forestry activities. Although forestry activities have good riparian buffers, there still can be some sediment associated with clear cuts and things like that. It can be of any variety of sources where you have bare erodible soils that can be mobilized during rain events.
And that's what we have. Forestry specifically has our voluntary best management practices to kind of help curb some of those threats to the landscape or the species that live therein.
Correct. And those are implemented at a very high rate in Arkansas. So
yeah, our BMP usage again is voluntary, and I think a lot of people try to adhere pretty strictly to those practices for a lot of different reasons. One of them being to protect the landscape. And if you want to know more about best management practices, we did an episode forever ago. You can go back and listen to that episode. But we're kind of focusing here on the endangered species stuff. So, Chris, I don't want to get all kind of doomy and gloomy here, but if you can just explain the impact of losing one of these endangered or threatened species, aquatic or otherwise, what does that do to the ecosystem, the landscape, what have you?
Yeah, so I don't like to think of the loss of a species as being an isolated event. So it's really a signal of ecological stress on the system. And anytime we lose a species, it can create a chain event where other species in that ecosystem decline or become extinct as well. So, when you think about ecosystems, it's kind of like a spider web. So you've got this network of everything has a purpose and it's linked together. And, some of those species are specialists, and they have very specialized roles within the ecosystem. And then you've got other species that are just kind of broadly supportive of the ecosystem. And so when we lose a species, we lose part of that ecological function in the system. And those ecological functions that species serve can be a variety of things, but, just to kind of think of a few things that people are probably more common with, it's things like nutrient cycling, seed dispersal, pollination, filtering water, which improves water quality if you're a freshwater mussel.
So it kind of weakens that web you were talking about just a little bit, but it could be a domino effect of when one goes, another goes, and that web just keeps getting weaker and weaker and weaker until it collapses.
And like I mentioned, it's usually a signal of ecological stress, and so there's if we're losing species, it's usually because something in the ecosystem is out of whack.
And you said, and I'm hoping I'm interpreting the definition of endemic here, but a lot of these species are unique. So if we lose them here, they're just straight up gone. Correct?
Correct. Yeah. Any of our endemic species that only occur here in Arkansas are within the interior highlands, which is the Ozark Highlands, Boston Mountains, Ouachita Mountains. That's the only place in the world those species occur. So when we lose them here, then they're lost forever.
Okay. Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick break and cut to a quick sponsor break from our friends over at Farm Credit. Farm Credit understands all things ag, including timber. Rural America has trusted Farm Credit for reliable, long-term financing for more than 100 years. Financing farms, timber, rural homes, agribusinesses, and more is all they do, which means they do it really well. Farm Credit is committed to the timber industry. They have experienced staff who understand the financing needs of timber producers and timber operations. Call Farm Credit today for long-term competitive rates that'll support your timber operation success. Farm Credit of Western Arkansas, the timber lending specialist, equal housing lender. Thank you so much to Farm Credit for their support of the show. So, Chris, we're kind of entering the tail end of our conversation, and we entered into the break on a bit of a downer, but it's not all doom and gloom. Work is being done, like you mentioned earlier, to make sure that these threatened and endangered species do not disappear from our ecosystem. So let's talk a little bit about some of the work being done to help these species. What's going on from your kind of side of the field to make sure that these creatures aren't lost forever?
Yeah, Seth, it's good to talk about the positive stuff and not the doom and gloom. So I first I just want to say, we have absolutely amazing partners in Arkansas. I've worked with a lot of people throughout my career that have gone to other states, and some of them have come back, some of them haven't. But everybody always talks about how great our partners are here in Arkansas, and we're a small state, and to recover a species, it takes a team, and so having those great partners to work with is really a positive. It's a win-win, not only for our partners, but also for the species. So, when we think about recovery activities, I guess, I just kind of want to kind of categorize them first, to kind of give people an overview of the different types of categories or activities that we might be involved with. So, the first thing is, that a lot of people are probably familiar with is population monitoring. So, we monitor the status of those populations, and then another one is landowner agreements. So anytime we're working with landowners, we have different types of agreements that are available to provide technical and financial assistance to them. We also do quite a bit of land acquisition in Arkansas. Then we have research, which is performed by our universities to help fill data gaps where we have them, to help us know more about the species. And then filling those data gaps helps to inform future management decisions. And then another big one that we've already talked about is threat abatement. So it's trying to work with landowners and industry to minimize and mitigate those threats that are occurring on the landscape to the species. And so I think that's kind of, that kind of pulls everything together into categories. Oh, and then the other category I wanted to mention too, because it's a big one for us right now in Arkansas, is captive propagation and augmentation. And so that's working with like fish hatcheries and some non-governmental organizations that are involved with propagation work to propagate species, because we're losing them so fast that just doing threat abatement alone is not enough. And so we have to kind of give them a little bit of help in the interim while we're trying to focus on those threats. And so that's what captive propagation does, is it buys us a little bit more time to help kind of bolster that native population by augmenting it with animals that have been raised in a hatchery. So kind of jump into kind of, I guess, if you want to, we can kind of talk about kind of cave obligate species, and then kind of forest dependent species and aquatic species. Aquatic species, like I mentioned earlier, we're doing sediment is the biggest threat. And so there's several things that we're currently working on that are having a positive influence. One of those is something that we worked with the Arkansas Forestry Association on probably close to about a decade ago now, which was developing the Arkansas Unpaved Roads program. which is currently administered by the Arkansas Department of Agriculture, Department of Natural Resources, or Division of Natural Resources. So that program is a win-win for counties who are responsible for maintaining roads, and so it provides some financial assistance to counties to help them implement what we call environmentally sensitive best management practices for roads, or for gravel and dirt roads. And so, that allows, those practices allow counties to stretch their dollars further, which, in return means that they're able to spend more money on roads in other places. And ultimately, our citizens have better roads in the counties, and we're reducing sediment delivery to the streams, which helps the aquatic species. So, that's a program that we've been a partner with, and we've got, several partners on that program. And, it's still what I would consider, even though it's been around for maybe close to a decade, it's still in the early stages, but it still holds a lot of promise for addressing the sediment issue coming from dirt and gravel roads.
And I know some work is also being done at the Arkansas Center for Forest Business. Dr. Kevin Boston has been working on some engineering for those dirt and gravel roads to also kind of help assist with sediment and deterioration issues on those roads. So that's just another thing. More work is being done in that regards to make sure that these roads aren't being damaged or causing any damage to the landscape just through use or weather, what have you.
Correct. And then some other things that we're doing for aquatic species on the research side, something that we're really interested in, that we're just now in the process of getting some funding for, is sediment fingerprinting. So it's without getting into all the science jargon, in simple terms, it's basically collecting suspended sediment in our streams during storm events, and also taking sediment from different types of land uses on the landscape, and then apportioning that sediment that's being moved during storm events to different types of land uses. And what that does is that then will allow us in the future to know exactly in certain smaller sub-watersheds where the predominant amount of sediment's coming from. So if most of the sediment's coming from unpaved roads in this one sub-watershed, then we should be directing our limited conservation dollars towards unpaved roads in that watershed. Whereas maybe, the sub-watershed right adjacent to it, maybe most of the sediment's coming from eroding stream banks. And so we should be directing our limited money to those projects in that watershed.
So you guys are able to pretty closely identify where exactly that sediment is coming from to tackle those specific
Correct. We cannot identify exactly where it's coming from on the landscape. We can only identify the land use types that it's coming from.
Okay, crazy. And so I guess I don't want to cut you off here, Chris, but you mentioned to kind of and forgive me the terminology, but cave species, the work done there, is that different kind of than, I would imagine it's different than the work you guys are doing with aquatic species?
Yeah, so with our cave species, a lot of them occur in northwest Arkansas, so there's a lot of development up there. We have, recharge areas which are similar to watersheds, but they're not they don't necessarily follow the same watershed boundaries that surface streams do. So these recharge areas basically feed water to these subsurface streams in the cave system where the species occur. And so we're working with developers to minimize and mitigate pollutants that are mobilized during storm events from entering those cave systems, especially in the very high vulnerability areas within the recharge areas. So we've got those recharge areas classified into different vulnerability classes. So we can put more emphasis on the areas that are most likely to impact the species. And then, of course, we're dealing with cave species, so minimizing disturbance to those caves is really important. And so we do a lot of land acquisition of caves and some of the foraging areas adjacent to the cave where the bats forage at nighttime. The other thing I wanted to mention too about cave obligate species that we do is, to minimize that human disturbance, we also work with landowners to install cave gates that limit access.
And so, and you mentioned it here and you mentioned it earlier, you guys do work with various landowners, but what is there anything the public can do or should be doing to assist with some of these efforts that you guys are making to make sure these threatened and endangered species stick around for a lot longer?
Yeah, sure, Seth. There's a lot of things that the public can do to help us. There's a lot of great conservation organizations. So, I would encourage people, if you're interested in conservation, to, look up some of those conservation organizations. There's, some national organizations that we work with, like the Nature Conservancy, and then there's local organizations like your watershed alliances that we work closely with, Arkansas Wildlife Federation, places like that. So there's opportunities there for the public to get involved with some of that conservation work. And then, if you're a landowner and you have a stream, protecting that riparian area. So, keeping those trees and native vegetation along the stream corridors, what we call the riparian areas, that will help not only stabilize the stream banks, but it also help minimize sediment delivery and other pollutants that are coming off the landscape. Kind of helps hold those streams together. So that's really important to the aquatic species. And, then just, thinking about like pollinators, there's native flowers that you can grow in your backyard, that would benefit species like the monarch butterfly. So there's a lot of different things that the public can do to get involved in conservation. We also, with the Fish and Wildlife Service, have our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, which provides technical and financial assistance to private landowners throughout the state.
And is that just an application process that they can look up online and work to fill out, or how does that process?
Yeah, if they need financial assistance, there's a landowner cooperative agreement that we enter into, but we can also provide technical assistance. So, they can reach out to our office in Conway, just ask to speak with one of our Partners for Fish and Wildlife biologists, and, they can provide whatever kind of technical assistance they might need for wildlife conservation.
Great. Well, Chris, one question that I just thought of that I should have asked earlier in the show, but we'll ask it here. Are there any species that you guys have worked on that were threatened or endangered that are now no longer? Are there any kind of success stories that kind of pop to mind?
Yeah, there's a couple. Magazine mountain shagreen, which is an Arkansas endemic species. It's a small terrestrial snail that only occurs on Mount Magazine. So it was listed as threatened for a number of years, and it's, I don't remember exact year, but it's been, probably 10, 15 years ago that we were able to recover it and delist it. So it's been removed. It was actually the first invertebrate ever removed from the endangered species list. We've got a small plant called geocarpin that we've proposed to delist earlier this year. So that's another species that we're working with right now to hopefully remove from the endangered species list.
Okay, great. We talked about all, the doom and gloom, but I do want to highlight some of the successes that you guys have had over the last couple of years to make sure, all of this work has not been for naught, and that there are successes and they do help bring some of these species off of that list and help them kind of thrive in the wild.
Yeah, the other thing I would mention too, Seth, is there's obviously close to a couple thousand species on the endangered species list, and over 100 have been either delisted or reclassified from endangered to threatened. But the main, I think, take-home message is that the vast majority of those species that as a result of being classified as endangered or threatened, we've been able to either stabilize their populations or get them to a point where their populations are actually improving now. So even though we haven't removed a lot from the list, there's still success stories with each species there.
Well, and it's still a win, just moving it from endangered to threatened, because that is still forward momentum and progress to helping those species. So
It's a stepping stone in the recovery process.
So, Chris, I would be a little remiss if we didn't specifically talk about kind of forest-dependent species and some of the work being done to help those species. One of the specific ones that I think most people will have heard about is the red cockaded woodpecker. I know that's kind of been there's been a big push to assist that species over the last couple of years. So can you just talk about some of the work being done in our forests to help the species that are kind of forest-dependent?
Yeah, the red cockaded woodpecker is another one of those success stories. We've really seen a lot of population growth and over the last several decades across the Southeast, and a lot of success here in Arkansas as well, working with the timber industry. We've mainly worked with the timber industry through a voluntary program that we call habitat conservation plans, which is it's a permitting process that basically allows the timber industry to consolidate red cockaded woodpeckers on the landscape into conservation areas where they can be managed closely, at a level that will sustain the birds on the landscape. And so we've done several of those agreements. They used to be called safe harbor agreements and habitat conservation plans. And a few years ago, we migrated both those into just one type of agreement that's now called a conservation benefit agreement. And so we're working with one timber company right now on a conservation benefit agreement for red cockaded woodpeckers, and we continue to look for opportunities there to kind of fill areas between these conservation areas that we have in South Arkansas to provide more of a habitat corridor for them to move through. Something else that the Fish and Wildlife Service has been involved with, about 3 years ago, we signed a national agreement with the National Association of Forest Owners and the National Council for Air and Stream Improvement. And that was part of what we call the Wildlife Conservation Initiative. And right now we've got about 380,000 acres enrolled in Arkansas, and about, I think, probably about another 120,000 acres that's either pending or in queue, close to being enrolled. And so, that's a really great partnership with the timber industry that's demonstrating that we can work with private forest owners to keep those working forests working and conserve wildlife at the same time. So there's, those agreements are out there. So, if your listeners are familiar with either one of those organizations, you can reach out to Fish and Wildlife Service or to one of those two organizations for more information on those programs.
So are those mostly, the people enrolled in those programs, are they mostly like smaller private landowners, or are they larger kind of company corporate landowners?
It's probably a mix, but I would say right now, I haven't looked at the specific numbers, but it's probably more industry landowners at this point.
Okay. And I guess that's just, I ask to kind of show that it's not just the mom and pop tree farms that are kind of working to conserve the land, but these larger companies are working to make sure things like the endangered species are being protected on their properties, and they're doing the right things on the landscape, and not just kind of going in there and gutting it all and moving on with their lives. So that's good to hear that they are working kind of with you guys to make sure that these things are happening. Well, Chris, I think that kind of wraps us. But I'll ask once more: is there anything else you want to add or you want to say before we wrap it up?
No, I would just say, thank you, Seth. It was great being here today. Glad to participate in your podcast. And, if anybody's got any questions about endangered species, please reach out to our office. We're just down the road in Conway.
And thank you, man, for joining us. We'll make sure to put a phone number or a website for you guys in the description of this episode. So if you are curious about what they are doing at the Fish and Wildlife or have questions here in Arkansas about some of the work, you can reach out to them. You can go to their website and reach out to them, because that's what we're always preaching here. If you have questions, pick up a phone, call somebody. There are people out there like Chris willing to assist you and answer those questions to make sure that we're doing the right things on the landscape. So, Chris, thank you again, man. We appreciate you being on this show today.
Yep, thank you.
We want to thank you guys for listening. As always, we want to give a special shout out to some guy named Rob McCormick. We thank him for the use of our theme song, The Same Love. That's off of his album, The Folkster. You can find more of his music on Spotify, and we have a link to his website with show information and music information in the description of this episode. And we want to say thank you one more time to our sponsors this month, Farm Credit. We thank them for their continued support of the show. So make sure you come back next month when we'll have a new topic, a new discussion, and a new Voice of Forestry.